Howdy y'all, I'm back with another movie video, and this one is also a successor to my previous video I did that was called The Music That 4chan Likes, where I looked at some of the albums that are considered to be part of what is known as MU-core or MU-core. So I'm doing a similar thing. This time we're looking at the movies that 4chan likes. So this is going to be focusing on the TV board, which is the board for television and film. And in 2019, there was a poll done on the TV forum that lasted for 2 weeks, where 4chan members were able to submit their 5 favorite films. There were over 2,600 ballots cast with over 1,300 unique films, and they published a list of the top 100. We're just going to be looking at the top 25 today. I will say that it's a okay list. I would say that it's decent. It gives a sort of interesting, like, three-way vivisection where it's got a lot of movies that are like traditional, like, American-centric film lists will list as among the best, like the AFI 100 Best American Movies list, things like that. It's also got a lot of the stuff that, like, a more global, critic-focused, like the Sight and Sound poll will have. It's also got a lot of stuff that, like, the sort of film bro archetype is enamored with, which is not surprising. And then it's also got a number of things that are, like, more internet based. For instance, The End of Evangelion is at number 78 on this list. So it's an interesting list. It doesn't necessarily super reflect my taste. There are only a couple of movies on this list that I straight up think are, like, not that good. For instance, Snatch by Guy Ritchie at 94. It's okay. You've got American Beauty at 71. I don't think that movie's very good, personally. I liked it when I was younger, but I don't think it has held up. Interstellar at 55. Not a very good movie. Very, sort of maybe pleasant movie, but I think that, like, the intellectual stimulation of Christopher Nolan's movies is heavily overstated. I don't particularly find him to be deeply thoughtful or philosophical as a filmmaker, and people like to think that he is, I think, but I really don't agree. Gladiator, not a bad movie, but not nearly that good, I would say. And yeah, but so anyways, today we're going to talk about the top 25. And like I said, my tastes don't align super well with it. But that being said, there are 3, I believe, right? Let me just double check here. 1, 2, 3. 3, 4? Maybe 4. I can't remember where that one is. So 3 or 4 movies on this top 25 that would also be in my own personal top 25. I have seen 24 of these movies. There is one that I have not seen. I'm sorry. So my thoughts on that one will be brief, I will say. And I will say that all of these movies are at least pretty good. Even if they're not necessarily, like, my thing, or even if they're not amongst my favorites. I think they're all good movies, and they're all worth your time, for sure, the ones that I've seen. So let's jump in. At 25, we have Sergio Leone's final film from 1984, Once Upon a Time in America. This is a great movie, you know. Really, might be my favorite of Leone's movies, and that's high praise, I would say. Amazing performances by De Niro and James Woods in this. Really fascinating, you know, non-linear structure about, you know, history and memory, and, you know, very good movie. Very, very good movie. I have only seen the original. I've never seen the American cut, which is notorious for being only like 2 hours and 15 minutes long. I've only seen the 3 hour, 50-minute original cut. Scorsese funded them to try and restore the original intended 370-minute cut. But then there was some sort of like rights issues between the estate of Leone and the studio or something, where some of the footage they could use and some of the footage they couldn't. So they assembled a 350-minute cut, or right? 250-minute cut, sorry. 350 is a big difference. So 250-minute cut, so that's like 4 hours, 10 minutes. So like 20 minutes longer than the cut I've seen, but still missing like 20 minutes of footage. And that did get put out on Blu-ray about 5 years ago, but I have not seen that version of it. I haven't seen this movie in a very long time. You know, it's a 4-hour-long movie, so it's always kind of like a commitment to watch something that's that long. But it's very good, and yeah, not amongst my favorites, but still very good. Number 24 is another Sergio Leone movie, and it's kind of a weird. I'm really weirded out that it's this high on this list. It's For a Few Dollars More, the second Man with No Name movie with Clint Eastwood. First one was Fistful of Dollars, which was a remake of Kurosawa's Yojimbo, which is a movie that I really love dearly. But this one, you know, it's good. It's better than Fistful, for sure. But it's weird that it's this high. You know, I think Once Upon a Time in America is a much better movie. I think that Once Upon a Time in the West is a better movie. I would say Duck You Sucker is a better movie. Obviously, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a better movie. But, you know, I think that, you know, it is true that, like, the sort of American and the film bro mindset, they really like Leone, even though, I mean, that's not an American movie, but, like, you know what I mean. You know, Westerns have never really been hugely my thing. I do really like The Wild Bunch. That's probably my favorite Western. That's Peckinpah is just more my kind of style, I guess, you know. So certainly a good movie, but not this good, I would say. Number 23 is the one that I haven't seen. 2016, so pretty recent, from director Damien Chazelle. It's La La Land, the musical starring Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. So I did see his first film, Whiplash, which was good. It was a good movie. And from my limited time in music school, and then also from, you know, secondhand knowledge from one of my best friends who did 4 years and got a degree at the Berklee School of Music in Boston, which is like the most acclaimed music school, other than like Juilliard in the country. Very accurate, it seems, to the sort of abusive power dynamic role, egomaniac kind of thing that's going on there. But this came out, you know, it's a musical. I don't like musicals very much, so I just didn't have a lot of interest in seeing it. But then, like, you know, it like won everything, right? It won like every award, and then everyone that I know loves it, and even people who don't like musicals like it. And I feel like I probably made the wrong call. Like, I'm probably missing out here. Insane to me that it's this high on this list. It is the only musical on this list. 4chan doesn't strike me as a place that would be, into musicals, but I don't know. I mean, I'll probably watch it eventually. It seems like it's probably worth it. Number 22, I'm astonished that this is this low. It's Pulp Fiction, the second film by Quentin Tarantino. Also, somewhat astonishing, the only Tarantino on this top 25. Film bros love Tarantino, as is well documented. I love Tarantino. I have my whole film-going life since I first got into movies when I was 12. When I first seriously got into movies, it was because when I first was in junior high, when I was 12, and I would get home from school like 2 hours before my parents would get home from work, 2.5 hours before my parents would get home from work. And I was able to then, for the first time, start secretly watching their VHS tapes that they owned of the like R-rated movies that they liked, but I had never been allowed to watch. And so the first one that really like cracked my brain open was Rushmore, that I always think of as sort of like the movie that introduced me to loving movies, like, seriously. But Pulp Fiction was another one that they had that they really liked a lot, that also like cracked my brain open and I became very obsessed with. Is Pulp Fiction a great movie? Absolutely. I think it's absolutely a great movie. I think that, most people think of it as his best movie. And I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. I think it might be the most interesting narratively of his movies. The structure of it is very interesting. The sort of, non-linear vignettes that all sort of tie together with each other as the movie progresses. Very interesting structure that was very, hadn't been done very much before in American cinema at the time. Personally, I like Kill Bill the most. Kill Bill could also be like written off as being like a very derivative movie. He's maybe doing his, fan service more there than he has any other movie, but he's just so good at it, and he's also doing fan service to things that I love. Also, he loves the same things I love, and that's why I love that. I also think that Inglourious Basterds is a better movie than Pulp Fiction, personally. I think that, it's becoming increasingly trendy for people to sort of have backlash against stuff that film bros like, which is fine, I think that, questioning why something is universally acclaimed is important. I think that pointing out ways that these movies are flawed is important. There are a number of movies on this list that are film bro movies that are notorious because people who are film bros will often maybe relate to the main character in a way that is indicative of a problem. Like, you shouldn't relate to this person because they're not a good person, right? But I also think that, like, hot taking is not like a personality, and not liking Quentin Tarantino doesn't make you interesting. I don't think, especially when, not to be a total asshole, but like, people will be like, Quentin Tarantino makes shitty movies, but we need to talk about why Legally Blonde is like one of the best movies ever made. I'm not going to say Legally Blonde sucks, but like, it's not one of the best movies ever made, and it is not, a piece of like well-crafted cinema. It's just not, it's not in that league. I don't, whatever. I'm being pretentious and gatekeepy, but it doesn't matter. Let's move on. 21. Ridley Scott's Alien, 1979. So this, I think, is in my top 25, but it might be slightly lower. It's in my top 50 for sure. One of the best horror movies ever made, just hands down. There's no arguing with that, I think. In, like, impeccable cast, just one of the best casts ever made. Probably the best, like, technical team ever assembled to make a movie. It was all people who originally were gathered together to make Jodorowsky's Dune, which never happened. But, like, the art department, set design, creature design, effects, all of that stuff, just some of the best people to ever do it. Absolutely amazing, iconic, design work by H.R. Giger with the Xenomorph. And Ridley Scott, he's an incredibly talented director, and this is his best movie, I think. It's just like a perfect movie. And, I saw it for the first time when I was a kid, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And it just holds up really, really well, It is really the real deal. One of the best movies ever made. Number 20, a movie that I have loved dearly since it first was released in 2007, when I was a senior in high school. Joel and Ethan Coen's No Country for Old Men, based on the novel by Cormac McCarthy. This is the only Coen Brothers on the top 25. And, I think it is my favorite Coen Brothers movie. I think that the maybe bigger consensus is Fargo, right? That's maybe the classic answer. Fargo is very good. Fargo is very, very good. But there are other even movies of theirs that I like more. I do love Big Lebowski. It's I've seen it so many times though that it kind of doesn't do much for me anymore, personally. I've always been more of a fan of the Coen Brothers when they're doing darker noir crime stuff than I am of their comedy stuff. So like Blood Simple, amazing. Miller's Crossing, amazing, But I think that they really just like were firing on all cylinders when No Country for Old Men came out. And it was funny because they were coming off of like a couple of like kind of stinkers, like they had done they had done O Brother and The Man Who Wasn't There in 2000 and 2001, and those were very good. Man Who Wasn't There, I think, is a very underrated, underseen movie. But then they did Intolerable Cruelty, that really mediocre sort of romantic comedy with Catherine Zeta-Jones and George Clooney. Not great. Then they did that remake of The Lady Killers with the Marlon Wayans and Tom Hanks. Again, not great. Though I will compliment that movie for giving my mother the knowledge of the cultural touchstone of the song "I Left My Wallet in El Segundo" by A Tribe Called Quest. So, they were kind of in decline. And then they came back with No Country, and it was just like, oh man, it was like really brutal and intense in a way that they hadn't made a movie be in quite a while. And they haven't really had you know, Llewyn Davis is good, but they haven't reached like their high heights again since, I think. You know, like Burn After Reading was fine. Serious Man was pretty good, probably underrated. True Grit I thought was not very good. Llewyn Davis was good. Hail Caesar was, you know, kind of whatever, and Buster Scruggs also I thought was kind of whatever. So ultimately, I would say that I think that this is a fair thing to be on this list, even though it's not personally on mine. I do think it is a really good movie. Number 18 and 19 are both movies in my personal top 10 favorite movies. So 19, from the year 2008, it is Sion Sono's 4-hour epic Love Exposure. I saw this movie for the first time a little over a year ago during quarantine. I had known about it for a long time, but it's not like a movie that you necessarily like stumble upon. It's not like streaming on any sort of streaming services, and it hasn't ever really had much of a physical release in America. But, you know, I'd been hearing about it, seeing people saying it's such an amazing movie. You know, it's on the top 100 overall highest ranked movies on Letterboxd, all these things. And so in like 2017 maybe, I found a fairly cheap Blu-ray of it online and bought it. And then I just sat on my shelf for 3 years because it's 4 hours long. And, you know, like I said earlier, it is a commitment to watch a 4-hour movie. And then when I finally watched it, I was just like, I am such a fucking idiot. I can't believe I waited this long to watch this fucking movie. It just absolutely, like, rumbled me to my core in a way that very few movies do, you know. So it's to try and wrap up what this movie is about as quickly as possible, because like I said, it's 4 hours long, so it's a pretty epic film. It's about a young boy, Yu, whose father is a Catholic priest in Japan. This is a Japanese movie. And so his father is sort of going through this intense crisis about his faith, and he's sort of imposing all of this sort of religious trauma onto his son, forcing him repeatedly to go to confession and confess to his sins. And Yu is like this very good, do-good, you know, very sort of lame, nerdy kid who doesn't have any sins to confess because he's tries to very hard to be a good kid, and his father consistently is like, you have to confess, you're lying, you need to, for like blah blah blah. And so he doesn't want to lie because lying is wrong. So the answer he stumbles upon is that he'll do things that are sins so that he will then have something to confess to his father. And the sort of roundabout way that this happens is he gets recruited into this scheme that this other kid at his school is doing, where they are doing upskirt photography and selling it to porno mags. This is a thing that has some presence in American pornography, but is a huge thing in Japan and in Southeast Asia, you know, secretly taking pictures of women's underpants up their skirts using covert methods. And it turns out Yu is really good at this because he's skilled in the arts of kung fu, and he can sort of like do flips and shit to get the pictures he needs. And then a couple things happen at the same time. The first thing is that he is out doing this, taking photographs, and he's doing it in drag. He's dressed up like Meiko Kaji from the Female Prisoner Scorpion films, with the big black dress and the huge black hat. And while he's in drag, he meets this girl, Yoko, who he absolutely falls in love with. And the problem is she falls in love with him too, but as a woman, this woman that he is pretending to be. And so then there's this sort of like comedy of errors plot about now she thinks that she's a lesbian, and he's trying to spend as much time with her as he can, and he's like he's him, but he's pretending that the female version of himself is someone that he knows, so that he can like set them up on dates and all, and it's very silly. And then at the same time, there's this other girl who becomes enamored with Yu, who is the member of this sort of very sinister doomsday cult, and she focuses all of the cult's sort of efforts about into trying to kidnap Yu and have her way with him and indoctrinate him into their doomsday cult. It's a very, very, very wild movie that has so many things that I really love in it. I'll just read my Letterboxd review from when I watched it for the first time. Thinking about how long I've deprived myself of this movie simply because I didn't want to make the time to watch a 4-hour movie. What a fool I was. This has everything I want from a movie. Kung fu, weird Japanese perverted stuff, romance, anti-religious sentiments, castration, fantastic acting, arterial blood sprays, an amazing ending, Mako Kaji fetishism, etc., etc. It's rare I watch a movie and immediately want to watch it again. It's unheard of for this to happen with something this long, and it does not feel its length. It feels like, if anything, it could have been even longer. Most love stories I like are kind of sad, and I guess this one is too in a way, but I can't really think of another movie that I would call a romance that I like this much. Maybe Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? I said, wow, I'm just gushing now. This is like the feeling you get after you finish a really, really good book. What a lovely thing. I think we all know that feeling. I can't recommend this movie enough. And same with number 18, the movie that follows it, which is David Lynch's 2001 film Mulholland Drive. David Lynch is my favorite filmmaker, which is, kind of a chuggy thing to say nowadays, maybe. But whatever, I don't care. I love him, and I always have loved him. He's been my favorite filmmaker probably since I was like 17. I had seen most of his stuff before then, but then there was like this sort of period of time where everything sort of started firing on all cylinders for me, and that was when I got like really invested in his work. Mulholland Drive is my second favorite of his features. 3 of his features I have in my top 10 favorite films. Eraserhead is my favorite, personally. But I think that, Mulholland Drive is at this point, most people think of as the best. When I was younger, when I first got into him, it was much more thought of that that Blue Velvet was the best. And I think part of that was just that Mulholland Drive was still very new at the time. When I was first getting into Lynch and seeing his movies, it was when I was like 13, so it was only just a couple years after Mulholland Drive had come out. It hadn't sort of had the time to prove itself, I think, as a staying power in cinema canon yet. And I think it's a fine choice to call his best movie. It's got pretty much everything that makes a Lynch movie, and it does it all at 11 out of 10 quality and speed, and it's just like the perfect mystery. It's just great. It's a great movie. If you've never seen it, it's about 2 women. One is a sort of naive Canadian, girl who wants to be an actress, played by Naomi Watts, who comes to Hollywood to make it big in show business. And then at the same time, there's another woman, played by Laurel Herring, who is in a car accident, a car crash on Mulholland Drive, and in the wake of it, she loses her memory, but she was embroiled in some sort of bad actors, and people are trying to find her and hurt her, and the two of them find each other and take it upon themselves to try and find out who this woman, who they names herself Rita, after Rita Hayworth, find out who she is and what happened to her and what's going on. And then things get pretty fucking wild, I will say, particularly after about the halfway point of the film. Things get very fucking wild in the back half. And there's a few other, sort of B-plots that are happening. The major one being Justin Theroux's character, who's a director trying to cast his film, and the financiers behind his film may be in some way related to the people who are looking for Rita. And then there's a few other small things happening as well. Just an amazing movie, like I said, it's in my top 5 movies of all time, and I've seen literally thousands of movies, and it's just unreal how good this movie is. Number 17, we have the third appearance by Sergio Leone. Guy only made 7 movies. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 1966, right? That's correct. This is a great movie. It's great. It's often considered the best Western. It's definitely considered the best spaghetti Western, but often people will call it the best Western of all time. Like I said, I'm a peck and paw guy myself, personally. But this is a foundational movie, hugely influential, copied many times, but never really emulated, I don't think. And Morricone's score is one of the best and most legendary and memorable, important film scores in the history of cinema. So, yeah. Number 16 is a movie that I do hold dear to my heart, and maybe should be in my top 50, even though it isn't. And that is the 1988 feature film by John McTiernan, Die Hard. It's become pretty chuggy now to say that Die Hard is a Christmas movie or whatever. I do usually watch it around Christmas, though, even though it is chuggy now. I even went, a couple years ago, we went to the Alamo Drafthouse, did a movie party around Christmas for Die Hard, which was fun. They gave everybody cap guns to shoot off during the firefights, and it was a good time. Die Hard is just a perfect action movie, It's like a perfect script. It sets up everything perfectly, like, it hits all the markers, it's just a textbook example of, like, how to do everything properly. There's no fat on the whole movie. It's just a well-oiled machine. And then you've got two, like, the two perfect people for the two roles, right? You've got Bruce Willis, who is, like, one of the best, most charismatic, likable action stars ever, right? Just so likable, so relatable. You want to root for him. You want to like him. And then you've got Alan Rickman in the villain role as Hans Gruber. This is his first film. He had only ever done theater before. And Rickman is just, he's a powerhouse. He was one of the best actors of his generation, I think. And he's just the perfect slimeball, cocky, cocksure guy, the perfect foil for the sort of working everyman that John McClane is. Yeah, I mean, truly one of the best action movies ever made, I think. I feel like if you don't like Die Hard, there's got to be something wrong with you. Number 15 is a pretty boring choice, but it's got to be on the list, right? It's The Godfather. 1972, Francis Ford Coppola. A lot of people call this the best movie ever made. It's a good movie. It's a very good movie. I like Godfather 2 more, personally. I think Godfather 2 is more interesting, maybe a little bit, in ways, because it's like, because Godfather is about watching Michael Corleone corrupt and change, right? We watch him go from, being young and having potential. There are these different paths that he could go down. He chooses the wrong one, and it changes him, and he becomes the version of himself that his father feared he could, that he didn't want him to be. Godfather 2 is interesting because it's like the bookends, where we see the story of Vito in flashback, portrayed by Robert De Niro. Amazing. That's I love the Vito stuff. The De Niro stuff is my favorite Godfather anything. And then we also have the sequel stuff, where we're seeing sort of the results of the choices that Michael has made. He's made his bed, and now he has to sleep in it, right? And I think that's really interesting too. But I can't argue with The Godfather being on here. It's again like pretty much a perfect movie, and it is also like sort of a no-fat, well-oiled machine, despite it being almost 3 hours long. This is another one that I feel like people try to hot take and be like, Godfather's mid, honestly, and they think that that's like a personality, and that's annoying. I don't adore this movie. I don't feel like it's one of my favorite movies, but I can't argue that it's a great movie. Number 14, another movie that came out like within a month. It was Oscar season, winter of 2007. So same time as No Country for Old Men. It's Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. I was a big PTA fan when I was young, like when I first got into movies as a teenager, because he had done, at that point, he had done, of course, Heart 8, but Boogie Nights, and then Magnolia, and then Punch Drunk Love, and I was deeply enamored with all three of those movies, and I still am. I still love all three of those movies. I think Magnolia is maybe a little rough around the edges, with some hindsight. And Anderson agrees. He has said in interviews that he wishes he could go back and make it shorter, because it doesn't need to be as long as it is. At this point, I think most people agree that There'll Be Blood is his sort of definitive film. And I think on a purely sort of technical level, it might be his best film. There are a number of his films that I like more personally, that I don't, because the thing about There'll Be Blood, it's a sort of anti-capitalist critique. It's a movie about a bad person, right? It's a villain story, so you don't relate to or empathize really with the things that Daniel Plainview does. He's just a piece of shit. And I don't always vibe with movies like that much, unless it's like I'm seeing my own shittiness through them, then I can kind of vibe with it. But in this case, I don't I don't feel that way. Um, so my favorite of his films is either probably Punch Drunk Love, or The Master. I really was very had a very strong personal connection to Punch Drunk Love. I very heavily related to Barry Egan when I was a teenager. This sort of feeling of just like insecurity and weakness, and just feeling like you're unable to be around women, and then also just like the sort of wild mood swings and anger and feeling out of control, and I was a hormonal teenager, whatever. I've gotten a lot better about anger and mood swings and things. Go to therapy, kids. But yeah, I think that There'll Be Blood is a great movie, and I don't feel like it doesn't deserve to be on here. 13 is American Psycho. Mary Harron, 2000. Another really great movie that I've loved for many, many years. A movie that film bros love. A movie that people like to make fun of film bros for liking. A movie that lots of people like for the wrong reasons, I think. I think a lot of people miss the point, right? I don't know. What can I say about American Psycho? It's a great movie. It's a great takedown of Reagan-era yuppie stuff, and it's like, people will maybe complain about how it's this sort of bro movie, but it's, it's a movie directed by a woman, based on a book written by a gay man. I don't know. I think that it's a pretty good movie, and a good adaptation, a very good adaptation, I will say. I don't think Bret Easton Ellis is like a particularly amazing writer, personally, but this is a really good sort of version of his story. Iconic movie for a reason. Number 12. We have our first appearance from the man the film bros love the most, and he's going to be coming up again and again and again on this list. Stanley Kubrick, 1975, Barry Lyndon. So everybody's always loved Kubrick forever, since before I was watching movies. He's been considered to be among the greatest of all time. When I first got into movies, the general consensus amongst, the resources I had, which were like, my mom had the Video Hound Golden Retriever Guide to Cinema, which was like those big ass like phone books of like every movie ever made, and then they would rate it. So I had that, and then I had IMDb, basically. This was in like 2003. And the general consensus at the time was like, most Kubrick stuff was like amazing, except for Lolita and Barry Lyndon. And everybody was kind of on the same page that like Lolita and Barry Lyndon are like okay. In recent years, that opinion has changed, and at this point, it seems like maybe people kind of still feel that way about Lolita, but people don't feel that way about Barry Lyndon anymore. Barry Lyndon is a incredible movie in the sense of its filmmaking. It's on technical levels, cinematography, set design, costuming, art direction, all of that, just jaw-dropping. A beautiful movie. My problem with Barry Lyndon, personally, is that it's in service of a story that I don't really care about. You know, it's about a Irish guy who, well, so the letterbox summary here is probably better than I can do. An Irish rogue uses his cunning and wit to work his way up the social classes of 18th century England, transforming himself from the humble Redmond Barry into the nobleman Barry Lyndon. I think that you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a boring movie. There are long stretches of this movie where not a lot is happening, and when things are happening, it's mostly, you know, British aristocrats from the 1700s having parlor conversations about, you know, whatever. It's also very long. It's over 3 hours long. It was Kubrick's longest movie. It's a great movie. I'm not gonna decry it in any way, but it's among my least favorite of Kubrick's movies. And I've never held Kubrick like near and dear to my heart personally. Like I there are a lot of his movies that I really like and recognize are really amazing movies. But they've never numbered amongst my favorites, I guess, because famously, and I'm going to have to paraphrase here, but Tarkovsky, who is one of my favorite filmmakers, he decried one time that he felt like Kubrick's movies didn't have a strong emotional core to them, that they didn't necessarily have like just a lot, an emotional core. I don't know how else to put it. And I think I might tend to agree with that a little bit. I've never felt a strong emotional resonance, you know, with the films. I've always appreciated them greatly as like works of crafts of cinema, but I've never emotionally resonated with any of his movies. Though there are a few of them that I haven't seen in a long time, and I do want to rewatch. In that maybe I'll feel differently. You know, the big one I'll be getting to because it's coming up on this list. Is one that I haven't seen in a really long time, and I know I need to rewatch it. Number 11 is the other movie that is in my top 25, and that is John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. I think that The Thing is the best horror movie ever made. For me, you know, maybe not for everyone, but it's got the best effects work ever done. It has this impeccable cast of character actors. It's this perfectly crafted piece of tension, just escalates brilliantly. The way things are revealed to build the suspense, just incredible. And yeah, I mean, there's little. This is a movie that, again, it doesn't necessarily like super emotionally resonate with me. Like, I don't see myself in this film or any stupid shit like that. But it's just so good that I just love it, you know, despite. Number 10 is a movie that, you know, is often thrown around as one of the best movies ever made. It's also the oldest movie in this top 25, and that is David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia from 1962. You know, in terms of, you know, that era, the sort of Hollywood epic Technicolor era of filmmaking, is it the best one? Probably, you know. I think that, you know, it's tough now that it's 60 years later. We have to sort of reckon with a lot of the problems that this movie has, you know, now that we are all, for the most part, on board with, you know, the white savior trope being a problem. This one is interesting because it's based on a true story, and so it's hard because you're reckoning with colonialism and these hard truths that the movie is maybe obscuring. But it is a really masterful, epic movie that is a spectacle, and it's like they don't make movies like this anymore. It's just not financially possible to make a movie like this anymore that is just, and because when things are this epic now, it's things are done with CGI, and they have tricks to get around it. You can't just have this many people, these huge set pieces and things that you have to build out of physical wood and shit. It's just not doable anymore. And there's something really cool about that, and that I enjoy when I watch these older epics like this. This is a movie that if I could see, a 70 millimeter print of in a theater, I would go in a heartbeat, even though it's not, a movie that I hold very dearly to me, just because I think that seeing it, on a big screen like that would just be a very cool experience. Number 9 is a movie that I'm surprised is this high. And it's a movie I haven't seen in a really long time, and I probably should rewatch it. And that is Wolfgang Petersen's Das Boot from 1981. Wolfgang Petersen, he went on to come to America and make a ton of big ass action movies and blockbusters. And there are some of his movies that I think are pretty good from that time, like Neverending Story and Air Force One. I really like personally. Enemy Mine, I think, is a really good movie too. But then he also did stuff like the remake of the Poseidon Adventure that came out in like 2006, and he did Troy, the Brad Pitt movie. I didn't think that was very good. Also Perfect Storm, didn't really care for. Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, Morgan Freeman, didn't, not that good, I don't think. So he's kind of a mixed bag, but Das Boot is probably the only movie he ever made that's like a really like piece of like really serious filmmaking. Like most of his stuff is like popcorn shit, which is fine, it has its place, but Das Boot is like in a different sort of class. It's just a really fascinating technical achievement, just the claustrophobia, the way that the camera operation and stuff is just like impeccable. And so Das Boot, there are famously like 3-ish versions of the film. There's the 150-minute original theatrical version of the film that came out in 1981, and then there is the like 209-minute director's cut, which came out in the early 90s, I believe. And that's the version that I've seen, but I haven't seen this movie since I was probably like 14 or 15 years old. And then there was a version that was the full version, the full 5-hour version, which was originally made as a miniseries, but didn't see US release until it was put on DVD in the mid-2000s. And I've never seen that version. And it's supposedly very good still. Mostly adding more character development and dialogue scenes to deepen the emotional bonds of the crew members, which I'm into. I should probably revisit Das Boot. Literally, I think I've only ever seen Das Boot on a VHS, a 2-tape VHS set that I had of it. So, yeah, probably overdue on rewatching that one. Number 8 is our second appearance by Stanley Kubrick, and it's The Shining, 1980. You know, a lot of people say The Shining is the best horror movie ever made. It's a very good movie. I think that the reason why Stephen King really didn't like the movie was because The Shining, the story, was about a really specific thing, and that specific thing is alcoholism. And Stanley Kubrick took all of sort of the window dressing, the iconography of King's story, and then sort of stripped all of the meaning out of it and repurposed it. And I think that the result is kind of emotionally dead, you know? I don't really feel like The Shining is really about anything. Like, it's about abuse, right? But it's not, like, clearly about alcoholism, you know, the way that the book is. And I think that it kind of suffers for it, you know. It's a beautiful movie. It's a beautiful movie. Can't deny that it's a beautiful movie. But yeah, I don't know. Number 7. You know, I would say I'm surprised it's this high, but it is the ultimate film bro movie. The ultimate film bro movie. And I do love this movie. I own this movie. I've loved this movie since it came out. It's Drive. Nicholas Winding Refn. Starring Ryan Gosling and Carey Mulligan. You know, people, I think, you know, bros, a lot of the time, they relate to this movie, or they want to be like the driver. They think he's, like, cool, right? Because he doesn't talk very much. All of that, again, is missing the point of the film, which is, like, the fact that the driver is this psychopathic, violent man who can't actually connect with people, really. You know, he is a menace, and he's not a good person. You know, despite the window dressing of him, you know, taking care of this woman and her child, right? It's he's not an altruist or anything like that. I do think this is a very good movie. And you know, the opening, the cold open, the getaway chase, very good. One of the best sort of driving sequences in a movie probably ever. And when this movie, like, goes off, when it gets violent, is very exciting. Like the robbery scene, as well as the elevator scene, for those who've seen it. It's pretty brutal. And I do like brutal. So it's a good movie, but it is clearly not the 7th best movie ever made. Number 6 is the movie I was referencing earlier that I definitely need to rewatch. 1998, am I right? 1999. The final film by Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut, starring the then married couple of Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise. Again, I haven't seen this movie since I was a teenager, and you know, at the time that it came out, everybody was kind of pretty soft on it. Everybody was kind of like, oh, well, he's going out with a whimper. You know, he died after it was finished, but before it was released, and everybody kind of just didn't like it very much. And then now it's kind of gained this reappraisal that people really like it in recent years. And also, it's been getting, now that the sort of like Die Hard is a Christmas movie thing is a thing, there are a lot of other movies that people are like, X is a Christmas movie. And so, yes, Eyes Wide Shut is a Christmas movie. And I almost watched it last Christmas, but then I didn't. So this Christmas, I'm probably going to have to watch it. Number 5 is weird pick. It's just The Fellowship of the Ring. The Two Towers is 86 on this list, and Return of the King is not on it at all, which is interesting. I tend to think of Lord of the Rings as like one thing, you know. I don't really necessarily like separate them out. I guess that Fellowship is the best one, probably. It's probably the tightest, and it doesn't have nearly as much of the, what in my opinion is pretty cringy, like comic relief shit that's in like the third one. I don't know. So people who know me know that I have a complicated relationship with Lord of the Rings. My father is a very intensely devoted fan of Tolkien and has been for like 50 years. And so I grew up around these stories, and I was 11 when the first movie came out, so my adolescence was sort of dominated by Lord of the Rings in a way that eventually became very overbearing, and it's sort of analogous to like when you eat something when you're sick, and then you like every time you try and eat that thing again, it makes you feel like you're gonna throw up. That's kind of how I feel about Lord of the Rings. They're great movies. I'm not gonna try and act like they aren't, but I don't particularly ever want to see them again. Yeah, let's move on. Number 4, 1978? 79. Damn, I was close. Coppola, Apocalypse Now. This is my favorite Coppola movie, for sure. It's an amazing movie. So Apocalypse Now is interesting because like there was a sort of this culture after the director's cut of Blade Runner came out, where I think that there's this sort of assumption that the director's cut of something was like going to be the better version. And it was interesting because in 2001, Coppola did Apocalypse Now Redux, where he added almost an hour of footage back into the movie that he had cut, and it's not better. Some of the stuff that he adds in is interesting, but the majority of the stuff he added in is this sequence that people refer to as like the French plantation sequence, where they hole up with this aristocratic French family on their rubber plantation, and have dinner, and there's a part where the children recite this poem, and it doesn't really add that much to the film, other than giving you this sort of extra context of like the French colonialism in Vietnam. What it does do is completely stop the plot of the film for like almost a half an hour, and just it's a total monkey wrench in the middle of the movie, and the movie is much better off for it not being there. In 2019, Coppola released the final cut of the film, which is longer than the original version by like a half hour, but it is like 20 minutes shorter than the Redux version. And apparently he cuts out a bunch of the plantation stuff and then a few other minor scenes that were added in the Redux version. I haven't seen this version yet. So as it stands, my preferred version is the theatrical version, but I think that maybe the final cut version might be better than the theatrical. We'll see. I don't watch the Redux version because I feel like it's not worth it, even though there are things that it adds in that are good and interesting. I do think that Apocalypse Now is probably the best Vietnam movie. My dad, who was in Vietnam, is pretty adamant that it is the best Vietnam movie, the most sort of accurate movie about how being in Vietnam felt, you know, which is that sort of hallucinatory nightmare world of the jungle. And I believe that. I think that I would probably have felt the same way. I don't think that my experience would have felt like Platoon or anything. I think this is a fine selection to be in a list of greatest movies of all time, but again, it's not a movie that I feel a strong emotional connection to. So, number 3 is the other ultimate film bro movie besides Drive, and that's Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese from 1976. At this point, most people consider this to be Scorsese's best movie. My favorite Scorsese movie is The Last Temptation of Christ, personally. But this is probably second place. Again, a lot of people who I think like Travis Bickle and feel like Travis Bickle in a way that they shouldn't. Because you know who felt like Travis Bickle? John Hinckley. And you know what John Hinckley did? He wrote great music. Taxi Driver is a very good movie. One of the best movies about sort of male being on the fringes of society as like a white man and feeling that sort of white male persecution complex that has made this why this movie is so popular with film bros. Same reason why Joker is popular with the same crowd. You know, it's the same sort of basic story, except that Joker is extremely heavy-handed and not particularly nuanced, and not a particularly great movie. But this is a very good movie, and it is nuanced and well told. Yeah, it's worth seeing. Number 2 is a movie that I do love. 1982, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott, again on this list. You know, I don't like this movie as much as Alien, but it is a very good movie. I feel like, you know, in the world of like Philip K. Dick stories, this is missing a lot of the things that make him one of my favorite science fiction writers. You know, I vastly prefer Richard Linklater's A Scanner Darkly over this movie. But this movie is so influential, and it does have, you know, really incredible set design and just the tone, the feeling of the movie is so influential on the whole cyberpunk genre. I'm not going to argue with it, right? And I do also really like the sequel, which film bros also really like. And, you know, it's not a perfect movie, the sequel, but it is very good. And I think it's about probably as good of a movie as it could have been, considering that it is a sequel to a 40-year-old movie that's one of the most well-loved movies of all time in that genre. Blade Runner, of course, also famously has a bunch of different versions. There's the original theatrical version that it is generally considered to be dog shit. There's Ridley Scott didn't have the final cut on, and then there was the director's cut, which is actually not true. It's it's a misnomer because he didn't have anything to do with the director's cut version. It was basically like assembled by the producers to basically resemble his original cut. But then there is the final cut, which came out in the 2000s, which he did oversee, and is his preferred intended version. And I think that the final cut is probably the best version of the film. Yeah, worth seeing. Great movie. Number 1, we've got Kubrick again. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Again, you know, I can't argue with this movie. It's just an impeccable piece of cinema and craft, but yeah, it doesn't really make me feel anything that much. It's really fascinating. Um, but and like the final, 25 minutes or whatever is really interesting and beautiful, but it doesn't, so there's the famous quote, this now famous quote of David Lynch where he says that Eraserhead is his most spiritual film. And that's part of why I love that movie. I think that is a very spiritual film, and I feel that like really deeply in my bones when I watch it. And 2001, particularly the end of it, has a lot of the same sort of like very evocative, visual, surreal, uh, moments that you could compare to a lot of Lynch's stuff, I think. But it doesn't have that evocative, spiritual core in them that really moves me, like, deeply. I don't know. Maybe I'm just fucking weird and wrong. I'm not going to say that this is, not an amazing movie. I have given it 5 stars on Letterboxd, and I stand behind it. But it doesn't like hold a place close to my heart, personally. Also, I think it's interesting that we had 4 appearances by Kubrick in this. Right? We had 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 appearances by Kubrick, and not Clockwork Orange, right? I'm sure it's on the list though. Yeah, it's at 39. So yeah, like I said up front, I think this is like an okay list. It's interesting. It's interesting to sort of see that slant where 4chan is this sort of white male loner sort of place, and you see that represented with movies like Drive and Taxi Driver being so high on this list. And even maybe something like Lawrence of Arabia, where I think that maybe these young white men are not necessarily engaging with the problematic aspect of that film the same way that a lot of other people might. Also, there's a big sort of trend towards science fiction on this list as well, I notice. You've got Alien and The Thing, and then also Blade Runner in 2001 in the top 2 spots, and then Lord of the Rings fantasy as well, which makes sense coming from that sort of nerdy culture. I'm just going to run quickly through the rest of the list and sort of shout out some other interesting placements. Amadeus at 27, very high. I'm surprised. Another movie that like film nerds really like, but again, I don't really relate to it that much. Predator at 28, I give a thumbs up. That's an amazing movie. That's like the perfect combination of a horror movie and an action movie, and I adore Arnold. He's probably my favorite, big blockbuster leading man of all time. 29 is Stalker, which is my favorite movie. No Tarkovsky at all in the top 25, but this is his highest rated on this list. They're wrong, but it's cool that it's still on here. Brighter Summer Day at 30. This is a movie that a lot of film nerds really love, and I saw for the first time about a year ago, and it did not really do that much for me. It's a very good, well-made movie, but again, I didn't really connect with it too much. And it's 4 hours long, and it just didn't have the sort of emotional impact and epic sort of scope that a 4-hour movie should, in my opinion. What else have we got on here? Matrix, Heat, Jurassic Park, and Terminator 2 all in a row. And I'm not going to argue with any of those. Those are all amongst the greatest action blockbuster films ever made. Fight Club at 42 seems low for this crowd. Dark Knight at 47 also feels very low for this crowd. Persona by Bergman at 49. That's another one of my favorite movies of all time. Suspiria, 54. Personally, I think that there are a couple of Argento movies that are better than Suspiria, but it's I can't argue with that. Showgirls is at 60, which is really crazy. I love Paul Verhoeven, I really love Paul Verhoeven a lot. But this is his highest rated movie on this list, and the only other one of his movies on this list is RoboCop, and RoboCop's at 73. That's pretty wild. Showgirls is like a really weird movie that I wouldn't think would fly with this crowd the same way that some of his other movies would, like Total Recall or RoboCop, obviously, or Starship Troopers even. But I do love Showgirls. It's great. The House That Jack Built is at 66. That's feels weird because there isn't anything else by Von Trier on this list, even though he, feels like the kind of guy that 4chan dudes would really like a lot, because all of his movies are usually either about like how women are bad or something along those lines, and then this one is interesting because it's like the self-reflective movie about him sort of reckoning with why he feels the way he does about women, and using this sort of serial killer as an author surrogate to like explore why he wants to hurt women in his films. Doesn't seem like the kind of thing that 4chan would be into, but maybe again they're taking it the wrong way. It's hard to take that movie the wrong way though, because he even like incorporates clips from his previous movies in it to like illustrate his, I don't know. Anyways, John Woo's The Killer at 75. Amazing movie. Hard Boiled was higher up at 62, but most people wouldn't think of The Killer. It's pretty cool that it's on the list. Number 80, Summer with Monica, by Bergman. This is one of Bergman's movies I haven't seen. It's one of his earlier movies. Not one of the ones that you see being talked about all the time as, his greatest, which is interesting because the only other movie of his on the list is Persona, which is often said to be his best, but, Hour of the Wolf, Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, Fanny and Alexander, Scenes from a Marriage, like all of those are generally more well-liked and popular than Summer with Monica, so that's an interesting one to be on here. Last Year at Marienbad is at 83. That's a movie that pretentious people like. Wizard of Oz at 84. That's, I feel like that's a little surprising because it feels like this crowd would be too cynical for loving the Wizard of Oz. But I mean, how can you argue against the Wizard of Oz? Lost Highway at 85 by David Lynch. This was not a very well-liked movie at the time I first started watching David Lynch movies, but I think that the critical reappraisal has come, and people have rightly judged that this is a great movie. I will note that the Lynch stuff that's on here, which is Lost Highway and Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive, is all the sort of like the Lynchiest of Lynch stuff, except for Eraserhead, obviously. Except for Eraserhead and Inland Empire, which are like much less accessible than those three movies. But it's interesting because the stuff that's sort of maybe less Lynchian, if you want to use that word, stuff like Elephant Man or Straight Story, is not on here, even though I think that those are really good movies too. Really, really good movies. Only God Forgives is at 90. That Drive love, that Refn, Wending Refn love goes far. I didn't think Only God Forgives was a super amazing movie. Fanny Alexander is on here, actually. It's at 91. Synecdoche, New York, that's the top 5 movie for me. I have long been riveted by that film. It was my favorite movie for quite a long time. That's at number 93. Irreversible, by Gaspar Noé at 2000, from 2002. That's at number 92. That's a movie that its presence on this list makes me worried that maybe people are enjoying that notorious 10-minute scene of sexual assault in a way that they shouldn't be, just knowing the 4chan crowd. Social Network's at 96. Film Bros like that movie a lot. It's a good movie, but it's not as good as people like to make it out to be. D.W. Griffith's Intolerance is at 99. What a weird pick. This is just film nerd shit, of course. Intolerance is a good movie for sure, but I'm always kind of it's colored by the context of the film, which was basically that like people were really mad at D.W. Griffith because he made Birth of a Nation, and which, if you don't know, is a film that's about the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, in which the Ku Klux Klan are the heroes of the film, and it's about them persecuting and attacking black people who are played by white actors in blackface in the film. Very important movie in the history of cinema because it was the first movie that ever had a moving camera in it. It's an important movie, but people were really pissed off at D.W. Griffith when he made that movie because it was horrifically racist, and so then he made this movie Intolerance: Love's Struggle Throughout the Ages. That was a movie about different stories of people who were persecuted for being who they were, because that was what happened to him. People tried to... This was in 1916, remember? We think about cancel culture and all of that bullshit, the culture wars, but in 1916, people were trying to cancel D.W. Griffith, so he had to make a 3.5-hour silent epic about intolerance. Doesn't surprise me that much that it plays well with the 4chan crowd. All right, well, that's enough about all of that, right? That was fun. I think that lists like this are always, a double-edged sword. I certainly am indebted heavily to lists like this because when you're first learning about things, these lists of the bests of all time are really good ways to find things to watch and see that are good. The problem to me is that, like, whenever you have the lowest common denominator, the mediocrity always sort of rises to the top, right? The thing that's going to please the most people is going to be the highest on this list, which is the inherent flaw in the lists like this. It doesn't mean that they're not, important or worthwhile, but I do find that finding a critic or a group of critics or whatever, people that have similar tastes to you, and then listening to what they say is a more fruitful exercise, I find. Like, I have found that Letterboxd is really great because you can go to movies that you really like and look at other people who really like that movie and then follow them. And then, you can sort of accrue this series of friends that have similar taste to you, and then when you go to look at a movie, it will give you a separate section that's reviews that are just from your friends, to kind of give you an idea of, like, how they feel versus maybe the general consensus, which could be different. So, if you're here, maybe you're interested in my brain, my thoughts. So I would say that out of these 25 movies, they're all good and worth your time, but only a small handful of them are really amongst my favorites. So that's my final thoughts on the matter. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching these long-ass videos. This one's not quite as long-ass as the last one because I'm not going to put trailers in it because that was a huge time sink and probably not ultimately worth it. But whatever, it was an experiment. So I think that these movies are all so well known that probably it's not necessary. Thanks for watching. Good night.